A simple woman thought it was just a normal interview until she saw her father's face on the CEO's desk. The sun filtered through gauzy beige curtains, casting a warm glow across a modest bedroom. A worn alarm clock clicked quietly to 6:30 a.m. before letting out a soft buzz. Emily stirred. She blinked at the light, took a breath, and sat up. The room was neat, sparse, but full of little signs of care. A small vase of dried flowers on the windowsill, a handmade blanket folded at the foot of the bed, a calendar pinned to the wall beside her mirror. Nearly every square of the past 2 months was marked with a red X. 43 interviews, 43 rejections. She ran her fingers over the buttons of her blouse, making sure each one was aligned. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman in her early 30s, calm eyes, plain clothes, and a quiet kind of determination. The type that didn't shout. The kind that endured. Outside, the city stirred. Buses hissed along wet pavement. People hurried by. Emily walked down the apartment stairs and paused when she saw Mrs. Gonzalez, her elderly neighbor, struggling with 2 bulging grocery bags. Without a word, Emily took them from her and helped her to the door. At the corner, a man dropped a cupful of coins. They scattered across the sidewalk. Emily bent down, knees creaking, and collected every last one. When she handed them back, he gave a short, tired nod. She smiled anyway. Later that morning, she passed a girl crying quietly at the bus stop. Her backpack was torn. Emily knelt, gently took a safety pin from her purse, and fastened the broken strap. The girl said nothing. Emily stood, adjusted her blouse, and waited for the bus in silence. Her life was made up of these moments. Small, invisible gestures. 1,000 acts of quiet care that the world didn't notice. But that didn't matter. She wasn't trying to be noticed. Back home, her apartment offered no applause. Just stillness. The fridge was almost empty. The eviction notice was tucked behind a magnet on the door. The final utility bill sat unopened on the counter. But Emily's hands didn't shake. She poured a single cup of coffee, sat by the window, and opened her laptop. She refreshed her inbox. Job alerts. Promotions. A newsletter she never signed up for. Then she saw it. Subject: interview confirmation, 11 a.m. tomorrow. Her eyes hovered over the company name. She didn't even remember applying. But the time was blocked in, the invitation was clear, and her name was right there. She blinked. Her coffee grew cold. That night, Emily laid out her clothes for the next day. The same neat blouse, freshly ironed. She reviewed her resume again, taped the cuffs of her worn-down shoes. Then she walked to the photo on her nightstand. Her father's eyes looked back at her. Kind, strong, full of quiet mischief. He had been everything. Janitor, single father, her first teacher, her only safety net. He used to say, "Help first. Even if no one sees you do it." She touched the frame, her thumb brushing the glass. "Still trying, Dad." She turned off the light. Outside, the city kept moving. But in the small stillness of her room, something shifted. A circle had begun to close, one she didn't even know was open. And tomorrow, a photo on a stranger's desk would open a door that had been waiting for years to be walked through. But tonight, Emily slept peacefully, unaware that the world had already started to remember her name. Emily's apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of her ancient refrigerator and the occasional creak from the ceiling above. It was early, just past 7 a.m., and the world outside was still stretching into motion. She sat by the small kitchen table, nursing the last of yesterday's coffee, her laptop open in front of her. She had read the interview email 4 times already. It felt odd. She didn't remember applying to this company, Grayson and Company. Enterprises. The name rang no bells. No job board memory. No handwritten note in her planner. Still, the confirmation was there. A 30-minute slot booked at 11 a.m. the next day. A name at the bottom, Richard Grayson, CEO. She almost laughed. A CEO interviewing someone like her? Unlikely. And yet, here it was. A time. A date. A quiet beckoning. Her hand hovered over the decline button. Something about it felt off. Too sudden. Too formal. Too polished. But then she thought of the calendar, each red X, each door that had shut quietly in her face. She thought of her dwindling bank balance and the way the heat in her apartment stuttered on and off, unsure whether to bother. So she clicked confirm. Just like that, the day changed. She spent the afternoon preparing, though she told herself not to hope. She printed out extra copies of her resume, even though she knew they probably had it on file. She ran through mock questions in her head, practicing soft smiles and confident tones. All the things job sites tell you to do, none of which ever felt quite like her. Still, she tried. There was something about this one. A flicker she couldn't explain. That evening, she went to the corner store and picked up a tiny bottle of fabric refresher. Her blouse, though clean, had lost its crispness. She misted it gently and hung it by the window. In the late light, it almost looked new. The next morning arrived heavy with fog. The sky was a soft gray blanket, and the streets were slick with fresh rain. Emily dressed with care, tying her hair back twice to get it just right. She added a pin to her lapel, a small, silver circle her father had given her before her high school graduation. It didn't match her outfit. She wore it anyway. The bus was late. Her palms were damp. She checked her phone too often, watching the clock creep forward. When she arrived at the building, it was already towering above her, sleek glass windows reflecting the dull sky. She paused for a moment on the sidewalk, unsure if she was dressed for this kind of place. But she went in. The lobby was vast, cool, and pristine, all marble and chrome. People in press suits walked briskly past her, barely glancing her way. She approached the receptionist, who barely looked up as she asked for Mr. Grayson. A polite smile. A nod. Top floor. They're expecting you. She stepped into the elevator. It rose in silence. As the numbers lit up, one by one, her chest tightened. What was this place? She had expected a dull office, an assistant, a waiting room with bad coffee. Instead, the elevator opened directly onto a long, sunlit corridor. At the end of the hall, a glass door etched with the words, Richard Grayson, Chief Executive Officer. A woman in black greeted her softly and opened the door. Inside, everything was still. Emily stepped into a space that felt more like a library than an office. Books lined one wall, the windows open to the skyline, and at the far end, behind a sleek wooden desk, stood a man in his early 60s. Crisp white shirt. Warm eyes. He rose as she entered. Emily? I'm so glad you could come. She nodded, trying to steady herself. Thank you for the invitation, she replied. Please, sit. She did. He began the interview, professional but friendly, asking about her work, her goals, her background. She answered smoothly, surprised by how natural it felt. There was something comforting about his presence. Familiar, almost. Then, as he glanced over her resume, something caught her eye on his desk. A framed photograph. Simple. Black frame. Two men standing in the sunlight, arms around each other, both laughing. One of them. Her breath caught. She leaned forward slowly, her voice almost a whisper. That man. In the photo, that's my father. Emily's words hung in the air, soft but sharp, slicing clean through the polite rhythm of the interview. The man behind the desk paused. His fingers, which had been idly flipping the corner of her resume, stilled. That man in the photo, that's my father. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room like mist, creeping into every corner, settling on the skin. Richard Grayson slowly turned his head, eyes falling on the frame. He reached for it gently, almost reverently, and lifted it from the desk. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he studied the image for a moment, his gaze softening. Then he looked back at Emily. You're Robert Mason's daughter? She nodded slowly, unsure of what emotion should rise first. Confusion, disbelief, fear, hope? Yes, Robert Mason. He passed away 10 years ago. Richard sat back in his chair, still holding the photo. His expression was no longer that of a CEO in an interview. Something had changed. Something personal. I haven't heard that name in a long time, he said, his voice quieter now, edged with something more fragile than professionalism. I didn't even know he knew someone like you, Emily murmured, her voice barely audible. Richard smiled faintly, the kind that comes from memories long buried. He didn't. Not at first. But your father saved my life. The room seemed to narrow. Time slowed. Outside the glass, the city blurred beneath a low cloud. But inside, the moment was crystal clear. I was in my early 20s, Richard began. Fresh out of college. Entitled. Angry at the world. My parents had just passed away. I didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to be. I took a job as a night custodian, ashamed of it, honestly. And I almost quit on the first week. Emily watched him, not moving. But your father, Richard continued. He was the supervisor. He didn't treat me like I was beneath him. He talked to me like I mattered. Every night, he'd share his coffee, tell stories. Nothing flashy. Just decent, kind things. Like he knew I needed them. He looked at the photo again. One night, I showed up late, angry, frustrated with my life. I was ready to walk out, to never come back. I'd burned bridges everywhere. And your father, he just stood there, quiet, listening. He didn't lecture me, didn't judge me. He just said, "You don't have to be perfect. Just don't quit on yourself." Emily's eyes were glassy now. "I never forgot that," Richard said. "That was the night everything changed. I stayed. I worked. I went back to school eventually. Years later, I built this company. And that man," he pointed to the photo, "he was the first person who believed I had something in me worth building." Emily swallowed hard. "I didn't know he ever talked about that time," she said, her voice trembling. He always just said he was a janitor. A good job. Honest work. He never said anything about helping anyone. Because he didn't think it was extraordinary," Richard said. "But it was." He leaned forward now, placing the photo between them. "You remind me of him. The way you speak. The way you carry yourself. I didn't put it together until you looked at this photo. But now I see it. The same eyes. The same calm strength." Emily didn't know what to say. Her heart thudded in her chest. Her hands felt weightless in her lap. This was just supposed to be another interview. Another polite, "Thank you. We'll call you." Another red X on the calendar. But suddenly, it wasn't that at all. It was a door, one her father had opened long before she ever knew to look for it. And Richard, looking at her with something like awe, said, "I don't know how this happened, but I think this meeting was meant to be." The office felt different now. The polished walls, the sprawling skyline beyond the windows, none of it seemed as distant or intimidating anymore. For a long moment, Emily simply stared at the photo between them. Her father's smile. The familiar glint in his eyes. It was like he was there, watching, saying nothing. Just as he always had in the moments that mattered. Richard cleared his throat softly, almost hesitant. "I didn't bring you here for a normal interview," he said. Emily looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, folding his hands together. "You were recommended." Quietly. "Someone sent me your name. Someone who clearly knows what kind of person you are. I didn't even look at your resume at first. Just followed a feeling." Emily's brow furrowed. "Recommended by who?" He shook his head. "No name. Just a note. It said she carries the same heart as her father. If you're building something that matters, she belongs there." She sat back in her chair, breath catching. Who would have written that? She had no family left. No mentors. No connections. Just her, a woman sending out applications in the dark, hoping one would land somewhere that mattered. "I was going to cancel the interview," Richard admitted, chuckling softly. "The week got full. Meetings piled up. I nearly didn't follow through." He paused. "But then, this morning, I woke up and looked at that photo, the one you just recognized. And something in me said, today matters." Emily didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her eyes stinging. 100 emotions pressed against her chest: disbelief, gratitude, the ache of remembering her father in such vivid color. "I don't need to ask about your skills," he said gently. "I already know the kind of person you are. That's what matters most around here." He stood, walked to a small cabinet, and pulled out a folder, thick, with a navy blue cover and a silver company seal. He returned to the desk and placed it in front of her. "This," he said, "is not an entry-level role. It's not just a job. It's a foundation position, a part of something I've been building quietly behind the scenes. A branch of this company focused on mentorship, development, and outreach. We want to find people like your father. People who never ask for recognition but deserve to be seen. We want to build a culture of kindness from the ground up." Emily stared at the folder, unable to move. "You're offering me this position?" she asked, her voice thin. Richard smiled, not the corporate kind, but something warmer. Sincere. "I'm not offering it because of your last job, or your degree, or any checkbox you might think you missed. I'm offering it because you are exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a brief second, she let herself feel it, the wave of emotion, the memory of every door that never opened, every kindness that seemed to disappear into nothing. But maybe kindness never disappears. Maybe it waits, grows roots, finds its way back in unexpected ways. She looked down at her father's face once more, then back at the offer. And she nodded. "I say yes." The air was different. Emily stepped off the elevator, her steps measured, but sure, heels clicking gently against the marble floor. The once intimidating glass doors of Grayson and Company now seemed familiar. Not smaller, just more human. She wore the same blouse, freshly cleaned, neatly pressed, but something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders carried less weight. Her eyes held less doubt. A new nameplate had been affixed just outside an office down the hall. Emily Mason, Director of People and Impact. She stared at it for a moment, a quiet awe swelling in her chest. The hallway buzzed with soft chatter, the morning rhythms of a company coming alive. But for a moment, time seemed to stop, just long enough for her to press her hand to the wood and whisper, "We made it, Dad." The office was modest, but filled with light. A clean desk, a blank whiteboard, shelves waiting to be filled, a small welcome basket, nuts, tea, a handwritten card from Richard. "You belong here. Don't let the world make you forget that." She sat slowly, soaking it in. This wasn't just a job. It was a doorway into something bigger than she had ever dared to dream. By mid-morning, the team had begun introducing themselves. A mix of seasoned professionals and bright-eyed newcomers. But all of them had the same quiet curiosity in their eyes, as if they'd heard something about her story, even if only in whispers. No one asked about her resume. They asked about her values. They asked what kindness meant to her. They asked what she wanted to build. She was still learning the systems, still finding her place, but when she spoke, people leaned in, listened, took notes. By lunchtime, she'd already been asked to lead her first initiative, a mentorship program for overlooked employees. Her heart raced with the enormity of it all. But she said yes, because that was the promise she'd made to herself, to Richard, to her father. At 3 p.m., she walked into Richard's office for a scheduled check-in. He stood by the window, sipping tea, watching the clouds roll over the skyline. "You survived your first morning," he smiled. She laughed, easing into the chair opposite him. "Just barely." He studied her for a moment. "You look like your father when you think." She paused, caught off guard. "He used to go real quiet before saying something that mattered," Richard continued. "I always thought he was waiting for the right words. But now I think he was just letting truth find its way to the surface." Emily swallowed. "I hope I make him proud," she said softly. Richard didn't hesitate. "You already have." That evening, Emily stayed late. The building quieted. Desks emptied. Lights dimmed. But her office remained warm, humming softly beneath the glow of a single desk lamp. She looked around the space, still so new, so full of potential, and thought about every late night her father had spent mopping floors, holding open doors, offering coffee and comfort to people who would one day forget his name. But not this time. Not here. She opened a blank document, the title blinking at the top, The Kindness Initiative. She began typing ideas, structures, goals. A program built not from corporate strategy, but from memory. From heart. From him. Outside, the city pulsed with lights. But inside, in a quiet office on the top floor, a legacy long forgotten had found a new beginning. And Emily, no longer just the woman in the worn blouse, was now something more. A keeper of goodness. A builder of hope. A daughter carrying forward the unseen kindness of a janitor who had once saved a CEO's life, without ever asking for anything in return. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Emily's new role at Grayson and Company began to unfold like a story long waiting to be told. It wasn't just meetings and metrics, it was people. Stories. Small, invisible threads weaving themselves into something larger. The Kindness Initiative, once a single blinking cursor on her screen, had grown into a company-wide movement. It started with a story. Her father's. One afternoon, Emily stood before a room of managers and new hires, her voice steady, her hands unclenched. "My father never owned a suit. Never sat in an office like this. He was a janitor. But he taught me more about leadership than any textbook ever could." Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that listens, not doubts. She continued. "He believed that kindness wasn't a grand gesture. It was consistency. It was showing up. It was asking someone how they're really doing, and then staying long enough to hear the answer. From that moment, something shifted. Departments began implementing quiet hours, small blocks of time carved out for mental health. Employees nominated colleagues for weekly kindness spotlights. The stories were simple: someone staying late to help a teammate, a quiet note left on a desk, a ride offered in the rain. None of it flashy, all of it real. Emily read every submission. Some made her smile. Others made her cry. One day, a junior associate, nervous, barely 24, asked to speak with her privately. He sat across from her, twisting a paperclip in his hands. "I didn't think this place was for people like me," he said, "until I heard you speak." Emily listened. He told her about his mother, about growing up in shelters, about almost not applying to Grayson and Company because he didn't own a proper pair of shoes. I used to think being kind made you weak, he admitted. But now, I think maybe it's the strongest thing someone can be. When he left her office, he stood taller. Emily sat for a long while afterward, staring out the window. The city looked softer somehow. That night, she found herself walking home, even though the bus was faster. Her blouse clung to her skin in the late spring air, and her heels ached, but she didn't mind. She passed a man sitting on the sidewalk, his hands cradling a paper cup, his eyes tired but not vacant. Emily didn't hesitate. She sat beside him. They talked for 10 minutes. No grand gestures. No camera. Just two people sharing a moment on a busy street corner. Before she left, she handed him her sandwich, untouched from lunch, and smiled. "I'm Emily," she said. "Mark," he replied. "Take care, Mark." As she walked away, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. The next morning, on the office bulletin board, someone had pinned a handwritten note. Memo: a woman sat beside a man on the sidewalk yesterday. Not above him. Not beyond him. Beside him. That's what kindness looks like. I want to be that kind of leader. No one signed it. But Emily didn't need to know who had written it, because she understood something now deeply, truly. Her father's legacy wasn't measured in money or titles. It was measured in echoes, in ripples, in people remembering what it felt like to be seen. The rain was gentle that morning. Not a storm, just enough to tap quietly on the windows and make the city feel like it was exhaling. Emily stood in her office, hands resting on the back of her chair, watching as mist curled around the skyline like a memory. She'd been in this role for 6 months now, and it still didn't feel real. Not because she doubted herself, that part was long gone, but because something about it still felt borrowed, like she was holding on to something precious that belonged to someone else first. That someone was her father. She kept his photo on the shelf beside her desk now. A different one than Richard's, this one of the two of them, taken on a folding chair at a community fair, cotton candy in her hand, grease on his overalls, both of them laughing so hard they'd forgotten the camera. That was him. Her father. A quiet force of nature. And now, in a way, he was everywhere. Later that day, Richard called her into the main conference room. When she arrived, she paused in the doorway. The room was full, employees from every floor, every department. Some in suits, others in hoodies and sneakers. Some smiling, others curious. All of them waiting. Richard stood at the front, a small plaque in his hands. He turned to Emily, eyes glinting beneath the soft overhead light. "We've been planning this for a while," he said. She looked around, unsure what was happening. Richard cleared his throat, lifting the plaque. "This company was built with ambition, with innovation. But what we've become, what we are now, is something far deeper. And we owe that shift to one person." He looked at her. Emily Mason, Director of People and Impact. But more than that, a woman who reminded us that kindness isn't a strategy. It's a choice. He gestured to the wall behind her. Workers removed a cover to reveal a new name etched in gold on a brushed steel plate. The Robert Mason Center for Kindness and Leadership. Emily gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then the applause began. Not loud, not forced. Just real, full, grateful. She blinked back tears, stepped forward, and touched the plaque. Her fingers traced her father's name, etched there forever. A janitor. A father. A quiet, humble man who had once poured coffee for a young, broken custodian named Richard Grayson. And now, his name stood as a symbol of what leadership could be. That evening, long after the cheers had faded and the lights dimmed, Emily returned to her office. She sat in the dark, the glow of the city painting silver lines across her desk. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She reached into her drawer, pulled out a small notebook, the one she kept for letters she never sent, and began to write. Dear Dad, today, you changed the world again.